The air in the studio was thick with tension before a single word was spoken. Bright lights bore down on the stage, but the real heat came from Alex Jones. Already leaning forward, red-faced, barking over the opening question like a man possessed. His voice cracked with the same fevered pitch that had made him famous. A jumble of accusations and half-baked conspiracies, tumbling out like shrapnel. Viewers at home had seen this act before, wild claims delivered with unrelenting bluster. This night felt different. Across the table sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, collected and razor-focused. She didn't flinch at the barrage. She didn't roll her eyes or match his volume. She simply waited, hands folded, eyes steady, as if measuring the exact second the noise would collapse under its own weight, and then it happened. Jones launched into yet another rant about shadow governments and fabricated evidence. His words spilled faster, louder, a storm of chaos designed to overwhelm. But Crockett cut through it with a single, sharp line. "Alex, lies don't become truth just because you scream them." The studio froze. For a beat, Jones was stunned. Silent. The audience watching from home leaned in. Something in the balance had shifted. Jones tried to laugh it off, but the strain showed. His voice wavered. His bluster sounded less like confidence and more like desperation. Meanwhile, Crockett's composure only amplified her power. She spoke with the kind of clarity that slices deeper than volume ever could. Her words carrying the weight of lived truth and hard-earned credibility. This wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was dignity colliding head-on with chaos. One side thrived on fear, distortion, and noise. The other stood rooted in calm precision, armed with facts, unshaken by theatrics, and for the first time in a long time, Alex Jones looked rattled. Across social media, viewers would later describe that moment as the crack in his armor, the instant the bluster began to unravel. But in the studio, it was only the beginning, because Crockett wasn't finished, not even close. She had exposed a weakness. And what she was about to do next would set the entire night ablaze. The moment Jasmine Crockett sliced through Alex Jones's rant, viewers knew they weren't watching just another late-night shouting match. This was something heavier, something that carried consequences far beyond the studio. For years, Alex Jones had thrived on his circus of outrage booming. Voice, unhinged theories, and a loyal following, eager to lap up every word. He had cultivated an empire built on volume, not truth. But that empire now stood face-to-face with a woman who had no intention of letting his lies go unchallenged. Crockett represented something Jones couldn't drown out, a new wave of leadership defined not by bluster, but by clarity. She wasn't just another guest sitting across from him. She was a congresswoman who had carved her path through grit, law, and relentless truth-telling. Every word she spoke carried weight, not just because of her position, but because of the people she stood for: immigrants, workers, and everyday families who had lived under the shadow of misinformation. The stakes weren't abstract, they were personal. Jones had built a career exploiting pain-mocking parents of murdered children, profiting off fear, spinning conspiracies that left scars on communities already struggling for dignity. For him, lies were currency. For Crockett, truth was survival. And when those two forces collided, live on air. It wasn't just an exchange of words, it was a battle over what kind of nation America would become. Every viewer at home could feel it. Progressives, immigrants, ordinary citizens, scrolling through their feeds that night, weren't watching to be entertained. They were watching because the fight unfolding on screen mirrored the fight in their own lives. The fight to be heard, fight to not be erased by louder voices, the fight to demand that dignity matter more than deception. And Jones felt it too. His interruptions grew sharper, his voice even more frantic, as if he could sense his usual tactics slipping through his fingers. Crockett, meanwhile, didn't budge. She wasn't there to win a shouting contest. She was there to expose, to unravel, to prove that truth could hold its ground against the loudest lies in America. What happened in that studio wasn't just performance, it was a test. Could facts still matter in a world addicted to spectacle? Could dignity withstand the hurricane of chaos? Could a leader who represented the future silence, a man clinging desperately to the past? Every second raised the tension higher, as everyone knew, whether they loved or hated Alex Jones, that if his bluster failed him, here if he cracked. Under the pressure of Crockett's calm truth, it would mark a turning point in how millions saw him, and then came the moment no one expected. Jones leaned in, his voice booming even louder, desperate to regain control. But that desperation only revealed what Crockett had seen all along: weakness. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't untouchable. He was cornered, and the entire nation could see it. The battle lines were drawn. This wasn't just Alex Jones versus Jasmine Crockett. This was lies versus truth, arrogance versus dignity, chaos versus composure. And as the cameras rolled, one question loomed: how long could Jones hold out before the weight of his own falsehoods crushed him? The answer was coming. But first, the world needed to see who Alex Jones really was behind the bluster. To understand why Alex Jones unraveled in that studio, you have to understand who he is, and how he built his empire of noise. For decades, Jones has operated like a ringmaster in a circus of fear. His gravelly voice and red-faced tirades became his brand. He sold paranoia the way others sell soda: packaged, branded, and repeated until millions couldn't tell the difference between performance and reality. But beneath the theatrics was a business model as cynical as it was effective weaponizing. Lies to turn profit. It began with late-night radio shows. It's the kind where callers whispered about secret plots and government cover-ups. Jones saw a niche and filled it. The wilder the story, the bigger the audience. Black helicopters, secret elites, weather machine siffits stoked fear. He sold it. When fear wasn't enough, he pivoted to outrage. He learned that anger kept people glued to their screens. Anger made them buy. Anger made them loyal. But his success came at a cost to others. Parents who lost children in unimaginable tragedies suddenly found themselves harassed by Jones's followers because he insisted. Their pain was staged. Communities already reeling from grief were torn open again by conspiracies he pushed for clicks and dollars. His voice wasn't just noise. It was cruelty amplified. And yet, despite lawsuits, despite judgments, despite public humiliation in courtrooms where his lies were laid bare, Jones never slowed down. In fact, he doubled down. His supporters framed him as a martyr of free speech, a lone truth-teller, persecuted by a corrupt system. He leaned into that identity, painting himself as the last line of defense against imaginary cabals. Every attack on him became proof of his importance, every consequence proof of his courage. This was the mask Alex Jones wore into every debate and every broadcast. The warrior for truth. The outlaw fighting elites. But peel back the mask, and what remained was a man terrified of irrelevance. He thrived on chaos, because without it, he was nothing more than a fraud exposed. That fear is what bubbled to the surface when Jasmine Crockett sat across from him. Unlike others who stumbled over his interruptions or matched his shouting, Crockett saw through the performance. She recognized the desperation behind the volume. The more he yelled, the more obvious it became that his power was a house of cards, built on the willingness of others to stay silent, and silence is what Crockett refused to give him. Jones's arrogance had always been his shield, an assumption that no one would dare challenge him with precision and composure. But arrogance can only stretch so far before it becomes vulnerability. Crockett, with her legal mind and unshakable calm, is the worst possible opponent for a man like Jones. She wasn't intimidated by the theatrics. She wasn't there to play by his script. She was there to expose him. Line by line, lie by lie. For the millions watching, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Here was a man who had shouted down grieving parents, bullied opponents, and profited. Off fear now visibly rattled by a woman who didn't raise her voice once. His empire was noise. Hers was truth. His weapon was volume. Hers was clarity, and clarity was winning. Viewers scrolling through the clips of the confrontation that night didn't just see Jones being loud. They saw him losing control. They saw A man so used to bullying his way through conversations suddenly facing someone who wasn't afraid to stand their ground. They saw fragility beneath the fury. This is why the confrontation mattered. Alex Jones wasn't just a bombastic personality. He was a symbol of something darker in American culture. The idea that lies, if repeated loudly enough, can overpower reality. His unraveling on that stage wasn't only personal, it was cultural. It was the moment when the mask began to slip, revealing what had been true all along, that behind the booming voice and the conspiracy, Carnival was a man terrified of the truth, and Jasmine Crockett knew it. Her entire career had prepared her. For this moment, for facing down arrogance with dignity, for refusing to be cowed by power dressed up as noise. She wasn't just sparring with Alex Jones. She was dismantling the myth he had built around himself. And that's why what happened next felt less like a debate and more like destiny, because Crockett's story, the struggles that shaped her, the battles she'd already fought, was about to collide with Jones's unraveling in a way that no one watching would ever forget. If Alex Jones had built his identity on noise, Jasmine Crockett built hers on grit. Long before she ever sat across from him under the hot glare of studio lights, she had already lived through the kind of battles that shape a person into steel. Her calm in the face of chaos wasn't an act. It was the product of years spent navigating systems designed to break people like her and refusing to bend. Crockett's story begins not in the halls of power, but in the neighborhoods where voices like hers were too often dismissed. She understood struggle because she had lived it, seen it, felt its weight. She knew the sacrifices of working families, the quiet endurance of immigrants striving for dignity, the constant grind of being underestimated. Each step in her journey was uphill, yet each challenge sharpened her resolve, where others might have seen obstacles. Crockett saw proof that she had something worth fighting for. Her path into law wasn't paved with privilege. It was carved through determination. Long nights with casebooks, endless hours learning how the law could be both a weapon and a shield. She saw firsthand how justice bent unevenly, how truth could be drowned out by money, volume, or sheer arrogance. And she made a choice. If others would misuse the system, she would master it, wielding the tools of justice with precision. That choice carried her into the courtroom, where she earned a reputation for cutting through noise with clarity. She was relentless, not because she sought glory, but because she knew what was at stake for the clients who couldn't afford to lose. Each case was another brick in the foundation of her credibility, another reminder that dignity wasn't just an abstract principle, it was a lifeline. When she stepped into politics, critics dismissed her at first. Too bold, too direct, too unwilling to play the game by old rules. But Crockett never entered politics to fit into a system. She entered to challenge it. She carried the urgency of lived experience, the fire of someone who had seen her community struggle under policies written by people who had never walked in their shoes. Every speech, every debate, every vote carried the weight of that perspective. And this is why her presence across from Alex Jones mattered so much. She wasn't just another talking head invited to spar with him for ratings. In battles against injustice, equipped with the discipline of the law and the courage of someone who had already proven she could withstand. Worse than his theatrics, her calm on that night wasn't passive, it was strategic. She knew Jones thrived on chaos. He wanted her rattled, shouting, dragged into his carnival of conspiracies. But Crockett's life had trained her for exactly this kind of storm. She had faced dismissals, insults, underestimation, and every time, she had chosen not to mirror the disrespect, but to rise above it. That choice had become her trademark. Composure as resistance, clarity as power. Viewers watching the broadcast didn't just see a politician. They saw themselves reflected in her. They saw a leader who understood the struggle of being drowned out by louder, wealthier, more privileged voices, and who refused to let that noise define her. In a moment where Jones embodied the arrogance of entitlement, Crockett embodied the dignity of survival. Her immigrant-friendly message, her insistence on truth, her refusal to shrink in the face of attacks, these weren't strategies cooked up in a campaign war room. They were the essence of who she was, distilled from years of experience. She carried with her the pride of identity, the validation of lived struggle, the promise that ordinary people could rise and hold their ground against the giants of deception, and that is why the confrontation felt less like a debate and more like a generational shift. Crockett represented a new America, diverse, unflinching, unwilling to be bullied into silence. Jones represented the old one, loud, fearful, desperate, to hold on to power by manufacturing lies. When their worlds collided, it wasn't just two individuals clashing. It was two visions of the nation squaring off. Live before millions. The audience could feel it. Social media lit up, not just with applause for her sharp words, but with pride. Immigrants saw their resilience reflected. Progressives saw their values defended with strength. Ordinary viewers saw the possibility of politics not defined by noise, but by dignity. And Crockett, in her own calm way, seemed to understand the weight of what was happening. She knew this wasn't just about exposing Alex Jones's lies. It was about proving that the truth, spoken calmly and with conviction, could still break through the loudest walls of deception. That's why her composure never wavered, why her gaze never broke. Because for her, this wasn't just a battle with Alex Jones. It was the continuation of a lifelong fight for dignity, for truth, for the right of people like her and the communities she represented to stand tall in the face of arrogance. And that fight was about to ignite into something unforgettable. Because as Jones grew louder, Crockett grew sharper. And the breaking point, the moment the tension would snap into spectacle, was now only seconds away. The air felt charged, as if the studio itself understood what was coming. Alex Jones leaned forward, jabbing his finger across the table, his voice rising with each new outburst. He thundered about conspiracies, about deep states, about hidden plots so tangled even his own words stumbled over them. The veins in his neck bulged, his face flushed a deeper red with every syllable. To his followers, this was familiar theater. But to everyone else watching, it looked like desperation masquerading as strength. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She had seen this tactic before, overwhelm the room with noise, make the truth impossible to hear. But she was ready. She waited. For him to pause for breath, just a sliver of silence, and then she slipped in her words, crisp and deliberate. Each fact she delivered landed like a scalpel's cut against his shouting. Calm, measured, undeniable. Jones bristled. He tried to talk over her, raising his volume until it bordered on incoherence. Yet with every attempt, the contrast only grew starker. Where he sputtered and fumed, she remained steady. Where he leaned on spectacle, she leaned on truth. More unhinged he became, the stronger she looked. The audience watching from home could feel the power shifting. On social media, clips were already circulating in real time, Crockett's sharp interjections against Jones's frantic bluster. Commentators tweeted disbelief at her composure, admiration for her poise under fire. Viewers could sense the imbalance. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was an unraveling, and Jones knew it. His eyes darted, his hands waved. His words came faster, less coherent. He accused her of being part of conspiracies herself, of being a puppet for shadowy forces, of parroting fake news. But Crockett responded with precision, citing facts, quoting records, reminding him and everyone listening that evidence doesn't vanish just because someone screams. The tension, built with every exchange. The studio audience shifted in their seats, caught between disbelief and anticipation. Lel, how much louder could Jones get before he broke entirely? How much calmer could Crockett remain before she delivered the blow that would silence the storm? It was a clash of worlds, and both knew the breaking point was near. Jones pushed harder, his voice cracking under the strain, trying desperately to reclaim the spotlight slipping away from him. Crockett, steady as stone, let him exhaust himself, was waiting, timing the moment, holding her composure until the instant she could end the chaos with clarity. Every great confrontation has a turning point. This was it. Because as Jones hurled yet another baseless claim, Crockett leaned in. Her voice low but cutting, each word carrying the weight of undeniable truth. The studio seemed to hold its breath. Jones was shouting, but the audience wasn't listening to him anymore. They were listening to her. And in that silence, in that razor-thin moment where dignity met chaos head-on, Jasmine Crockett prepared to deliver the line that would echo far beyond the walls of that studio. The moment arrived like the snap of a storm breaking. Alex Jones was still roaring, veins pulsing, spittle catching the studio lights as he hurled yet another baseless accusation. But this time, Jasmine Crockett didn't wait for him to run out of steam. She leaned forward, steady and deliberate, her eyes fixed on him with unshakable calm. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud, didn't need to be. It was sharp, measured, each syllable cutting through the chaos like glass. "Alex," she said, her tone almost gentle, but laced with, "Steele, you've made a career out of shouting down the truth. The truth doesn't disappear just because you drown it in noise." The room froze. The cameras caught every flicker of tension in Jones's face. For a split second, the man who had spent decades selling himself as unflappable looked rattled. His mouth opened, but Crockett pressed forward, her words a steady drumbeat. "You told millions that grieving parents were actors. You told people school shootings were staged. Even when courts proved you wrong, even when families begged for peace, you doubled down, because lies made you money. Because fear sold better than compassion." Gasps rippled from the audience. Even the crew members, trained to stay stone-faced, exchanged glances. Jones shifted in his chair, a flash of panic crossing his eyes before he snapped back with a furious grin, trying to laugh it off. But Crockett didn't give him the space. She struck again. "You call yourself a truth-teller, Alex, but the truth is, you've built an empire of cruelty. And now, here tonight, you're exposed, not as some fearless fighter, but as a man terrified of silence. Terrified of what happens when people stop listening to your lies." Her words landed with the kind of weight that silence amplifies. Jones scrambled to interrupt, his voice booming louder, but it no longer carried authority. It carried desperation. He accused her of being a government shill, a puppet, a mouthpiece for elites. He gestured wildly, the veins in his forehead tightening as though volume alone might undo the damage. But Crockett only grew calmer. "You can yell all you want," she continued, her voice steady, almost soft against his thunder. "You can. Wave your arms, call me names, invent conspiracies. But here's the fact. The families you mocked will never forget. The parents you hurt will never forgive. And history will never remember you as a truth-teller. It will remember you as a fraud who shouted until the world stopped listening." The silence that followed was electric. Jones blinked, struggling to recompose himself, but the damage was done. The audience was no longer with him. Their eyes were on her. Social media lit up in real time. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett exposes Jones and hashtag Truth Over Lies trended within minutes. Clips of her calm dismantling began circulating before the debate was even over. Commentators marveled at her composure, at the way she managed to slice through years of noise with just a few sentences. Memes began to spread, side-by-side images of Jones red-faced and shouting. Contrasted with Crockett's serene precision, Jones tried to regain control. He leaned back, smirking through the panic, tossing out another torrent of insults. But now, the words fell flat. The more he tried to perform, the more obvious his unraveling became. His act, once terrifying in its volume, now looked pitiful, and Crockett, seeing her opening, pressed the knife deeper not with cruelty, but with the unflinching clarity of truth. "You can scream, Alex," she said, "but you can't erase the receipts, can't erase the judgments in courtrooms. You can't erase the grieving mothers and fathers who've already beaten you in the only arena that matters. Reality. When the shouting stops, reality is all that's left." That line hit like a hammer. Studio audience erupted applause. Cheers. A wave of sound that Jones had once commanded but now seemed powerless against. His face tightened, his attempts at laughter coming out hollow. He slammed his hand against the desk, trying to project dominance, but Crockett simply leaned back, unfazed, a portrait of composure. It was the mic drop moment, and everyone knew. Commentators later compared it to the kind of turning points rarely seen in live television. A collapse not just of a man, but of a myth. Jones's power had always come from his ability to rattle others, to drag them into a storm. But Crockett had refused the invitation. She stood like a wall against the wind. And the wind lost its fury. As the debate dragged on, Jones kept flailing, kept screaming, but the tide had turned irreversibly. Every word he shouted only made her look stronger. Every insult made her calm, seem more heroic. The contrast was undeniable. Noise against clarity, arrogance against dignity, lies against truth. And the truth had won by the time the segment ended. Jones was visibly shaken, his voice hoarse, his energy sapped, his face slick with sweat. Crockett, by contrast, looked almost untouched, her expression one of quiet certainty. The cameras captured it all, and by the time viewers finished watching, they weren't talking about Alex Jones's volume. They were talking about Jasmine Crockett's composure, her precision, her refusal to bow to chaos. For years, Jones had thrived on the spectacle of his own fury. But tonight, it was his fury that destroyed him. Crockett hadn't just countered his lies. She had exposed him, dismantled him, left him stripped of the very armor he thought made him invincible. And yet, as powerful as that moment was, it was only the beginning, because what happened in the studio would not stay confined to the studio. The shockwaves were just starting to spread. The segment ended, but the battle was only beginning. The second the cameras cut and the credits rolled, the confrontation between Alex Jones and Jasmine Crockett burst free from the confines of the studio. Within minutes, the internet was ablaze. Clips of Jones sputtering while Crockett calmly dismantled his lies, shot across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram like wildfire. It was as if the country had been waiting for this moment, someone finally standing tall, unshaken, in the face of years of noise. On Twitter, hashtags erupted almost instantly. Hashtag Crockett exposes Jones. Hashtag truth over lies. Hashtag dignity wins. Within the hour, they dominated the trending charts. One clip, barely 30 seconds long, showed Crockett leaning in and declaring that Jones couldn't erase reality. That single sentence racked up over 1 million views in under 15 minutes. By the end of the night, it had been shared across continents, turning Crockett from a rising name into a global headline. Meanwhile, the memes began rolling in. Side-by-side photos of Jones's reddened, furious face against Crockett's calm, almost serene expression flooded feeds. Some captions read, "Chaos meets composure." Others simply said, "Lies versus truth." The internet had declared its verdict, and it wasn't close. News outlets jumped in quickly. Progressive commentators hailed Crockett's performance as a masterclass in dignity under fire. Even mainstream anchors, often hesitant to spotlight such confrontations, couldn't resist. They replayed the exchange on loop, marveling at how effortlessly she cut through Jones's volume with simple, undeniable facts. One late-night host quipped, "For the first time in history, Alex Jones discovered something louder than his voice: reality." And yet, the ripple effect wasn't just about entertainment. For many, the moment carried something far deeper: validation. Immigrant families, progressives, and ordinary people, long drowned out by louder, wealthier voices, felt seen. Crockett's calm dismantling of Jones was more than a debate moment. It was proof that arrogance could be confronted, that noise could be pierced, that dignity could win. The response from Jones's camp was telling. His official channels tried to spin the confrontation as bias, claiming the audience had been stacked against him. He ranted in follow-up broadcasts that Crockett was part of some orchestrated attack, proof of a larger conspiracy to silence him. But the desperation was palpable. For years he had controlled the narrative with sheer force of will. Now, the narrative had slipped from his hands. Crockett, for her part, didn't gloat. She released a short statement thanking viewers for their support and reiterating that truth matters more than theatrics. It was brief, dignified, and deliberate, a sharp contrast to Jones's frantic spiraling. Her restraint only fueled the admiration. Commentators praised her discipline, noting how she had not only won the exchange, but had also avoided the trap of turning it into a spectacle of ego. By the next morning, the confrontation was front page news. Political blogs framed it as a generational clash, an unhinged relic of conspiracy culture brought down by a calm, precise leader of the future. International outlets picked it up, pointing out how the showdown mirrored larger global tensions between demagoguery and dignity. Crockett's words had transcended the studio, they had become a rallying cry. And for Jones, the damage was clear. His performance, once terrifying in its sheer aggression, now looked hollow. Clips of him sweating, stammering, and losing control played on repeat. His own bluster had turned into a meme, his act reduced to caricature. The mask was slipping. Oh, the world was watching. But the most powerful impact wasn't on the news cycle or social media, it was on the people at home, who felt their own struggles mirrored in that moment. The single mother who had been mocked for her accent, the immigrant worker who had been shouted down by supervisors, the young activist who had been told their voice didn't matter. They saw Crockett unflinching, slicing through arrogance with clarity, and they felt hope, because this wasn't just about Alex Jones. It was about the culture he represented, a culture of noise, bullying, and fear. And Jasmine Crockett's refusal to bow wasn't just a personal victory. It was a declaration that the future belongs to those who can withstand the storm and still speak with dignity. The shockwaves were undeniable, and yet as powerful as the viral eruption was, Crockett herself seemed to understand something even deeper. That moments like these can only last if they're tied to values greater than spectacle. Which is why what she said next, calm, deliberate, and profoundly human, transformed a viral takedown into something timeless. When the noise settled, the clips had been shared 1,000,000 times, and the hashtags had run their course, one truth remained. What Jasmine Crockett had done was bigger than a debate moment. It was a mirror held up to America. She knew it. 2. In a quiet follow-up interview, she spoke not of victory, not of owning her opponent, but of the deeper meaning behind the exchange. Her voice was calm, her words careful, as if she understood that people weren't just listening for entertainment, they were listening for guidance, for reassurance that dignity could still prevail in a world addicted to chaos. This was never about Alex Jones, she said softly. This was about whether lies will keep winning in America, whether cruelty is the cost of fame, whether shouting is a substitute for truth. I believe the answer is no. The answer has to be no. Those words hit home because they reframed the confrontation into something larger than a clash of personalities. Crockett positioned the moment as a test of values. What kind of nation do we want to be? One that rewards arrogance and fear-mongering, or one that uplifts dignity, compassion, and truth, even when it whispers against the roar? Viewers replayed those lines not because they were fiery, but because they were steady. There was a quiet power in her insistence that America's moral compass still mattered. She reminded people that our democracy, fragile as it can feel, depends not on the loudest voice in the room, but on the clearest one. And that clarity became the lesson. Crockett embodied a truth often forgotten. Strength isn't found in shouting down your enemies. Strength is found in refusing to lose yourself when they shout at you. That lesson resonated far beyond politics. Teachers wrote about using the clip in classrooms as a reminder that bullies only win when you let them dictate the terms. Parents shared it with their kids as proof that calm courage can overcome cruelty. Activists held it up as a sign that, even in the darkest noise, dignity can still cut through. And for countless ordinary viewers, especially those who had been told their voices didn't matter, it was a spark of validation. They didn't have to outshout their oppressors, didn't have to match fury with fury. All they had to do was stand in their truth, steady and unbroken, till the lies crumbled under their own weight. That was Crockett's gift in that moment. Not just dismantling Jones, but transforming the spectacle into a parable. She turned a circus into a sermon, one that reminded people of something elemental. Decency is not weakness, and truth is not fragile. They are quiet forces, yes, but they endure longer than rage ever can. And yet the power of the lesson wasn't in its neatness, was in its challenge. Crockett left viewers with a question that lingered, a responsibility that couldn't be outsourced to politicians or media pundits. If dignity wins, It only wins when ordinary people choose it. If truth triumphs, it only does so when we refuse to look away, even when the noise is deafening. That challenge was the heartbeat of the resolution. It wasn't a pat on the back. It was a call to rise, to defend our neighbors, to protect our values, to be louder not in volume, but in conviction. Crockett didn't tell viewers what to think. She told them to remember who they are. And that, ultimately, was the most devastating blow to Jones. Not the viral memes, not the applause, but the reality that his noise, for all its bluster, could not shake the simple, quiet power of dignity. The confrontation was over. The studio lights had dimmed, but the moral lesson remained, echoing far beyond the walls where it was spoken. Truth is louder than lies. Dignity is stronger than hate. And yet, even as America sat with that truth, another question loomed. Because if Crockett had exposed Jones in that studio, what would happen when the world outside took sides? What would happen when the fight spilled from the stage into the streets, into politics, into the nation's fragile heart? And so, as the dust settled, one thing became undeniable. This wasn't just a clash between Alex Jones and Jasmine Crockett. It was a clash between the America we fear and the America we still believe in. Because what happened on that stage was bigger than a viral moment. It was proof that truth, dignity, and calm strength can stand unshaken against chaos. Crockett didn't just win an argument, she reminded a nation that arrogance and fear are not destiny. They are choices. And choices can be rejected. For millions watching, the confrontation was more than entertainment. It was affirmation. It was a reminder that their voices, their values, their very identities deserve respect. That they do not have to shrink in the face of noise. That composure and truth will always outlast the storms of conspiracy and hate. But here's the part that matters most. The story doesn't end here. Crockett's stand is only as powerful as the ripple effect we allow it to have. If you felt that spark, if you felt seen, validated, or inspired, then it's your turn to carry it forward. Share this story. Talk about it with friends, with family, with anyone who needs to be reminded that dignity still wins. Subscribe. Stay connected and be part of this movement, because every time we choose truth over lies, every time we choose dignity over chaos, we help write the next chapter of America's story. And maybe, just maybe, when the next storm of noise tries to drown us out, we'll remember this moment. We'll remember Jasmine Crockett's composure, Alex Jones's unraveling, and the lesson that still rings true. The loudest voice isn't always the strongest sometimes. The strongest voice is the calmest one.